Hello, everyone. This is Lala, and today I'm going to be talking about the 24th season of the challenge, which is Rivals 2. Obviously, Rivals a few years ago was a huge hit in the ratings department, and it's seen as one of the best challenge seasons ever. So I can definitely see why they decided to redo that theme for this season. And like I mentioned last season, they were definitely trying to bring in a bunch of new people to kind of carry over this next part of the challenge. And a lot of the feuds that were created on the second battle of the seasons, they wanted to continue those storylines into this season, hence the theme of Rivals 2. And I got what they were trying to do on paper with it, continuing the storylines from this rookie group from the prior season, see who can sink or swim here, and also mingling them in with a lot of the long-time veterans to see who can stand out and fit in with the veterans and who will get lost in the shuffle in compared to them. And I think a lot of the newer people got lost in the shuffle compared to the other veterans. But I definitely do think some of the rivals weren't as strong compared to the first rivals. Like pairings like Leroy and Ty were a huge stretch. I'm pretty sure there are other ones that weren't that good. Obviously, Frank and Johnny Bananas was the biggest stretch, but I do think there were a lot of interesting dynamics with the season. There were definitely some rivals that didn't like one another throughout the season. There were some new rivalries that were formed throughout the season, and I really did like the format where the opposite gender voted for who they would save and who they would send in for elimination, and it definitely caused for a lot of interesting dynamics on a gameplay point of view. This season had a whole lot of drama. I think the dailies and eliminations were pretty solid. The gameplay was definitely interesting due to this, and I think it just continued the momentum that a lot of these Era 3 seasons were having. Obviously, it wasn't as good as the first Rivals, but I do think it is a worthy sequel, and it definitely holds its balls compared to the other good Era 3 seasons. So, yeah, I definitely think it's a strong one. Let's just get right to it. Okay, so I definitely do have some more commentary. Just looking at some of these pairings, Anissa and DM was set a stretch. They're bringing back something that happened like 6 years prior from the duel to pair them together. I already kind of mentioned you and Ty being off. Even Dunbar and Tyree was kind of just ridiculous, in my opinion. And even just, I think one of the things that I didn't like is how uncompetitive it was from a woman's point of view, with Emily and Paula winning like 66% of the challenges, their win being so telegraphed, and them just not being very interested in giving much of an edit throughout the season. And also, those are definitely things that weakened it, in my opinion. So they are in Thailand for the season, and it is announced that this season is Rivals 2, where the pairs are CT and West based on their rivals fight, DM and Anissa based on the latter snaking the former on the duel, which was forever ago. Zach and Trey as they just kind of just shit talked one another last season, but that was really it. Jessica and Anastasia from Portland, Derek and Rob due to their fights last season, Paula and Emily based on the Emily mess on exes that involved Ty showmans with Paula. Ty and Leroy, this seems like such a stretch, and I don't know where the fuck this comes from. Naomi and Cook based on their Vegas season, Preston and Knight, which is a long running feud going back to their real world season, Jamie and Camilla, based on their bus fights last season, Kyrie and Dunbar, which is also such a stretch, Sarah and Trishelle, based on last season, where Trishelle was annoyed with Alton Schulman's with Sarah, Jordan and Marlon, based on Portland, Nanny and Jonay, where the former essentially slut shamed the latter last season and claimed that Zach ruined their friendship, Jasmine and Teresa, based on their fight on Rivals, and Johnny and Frank, based on a Twitter feud because Johnny was complaining about not being on last season and claiming that Frank's win doesn't count since there were no vets there. All of this is really such a stretch. They will win $125,000 for first place, $35,000 for second place, and $10,000 for third place if they make it to the top three. So CT gives the rules to the Wookiee women on the house, and CT is really feeling himself, where he and Anastasia are eyeing one another. Zach and Trey are trying to figure out how they are going to work with one another, and we see CT and Marlon push one another too hard in the pool because CT's annoyed that Marlon broke a glass, which happened because Jemmy accidentally pushed him. So literally, this is just an accident that CT just didn't see as an accident. Anyways, they're literally smushing one another in the face in the pool and are essentially somewhat trying to drown one another. And Jordan decides to hop out in the pool to shove CT again so he could defend his partner. And you would think CT would be careful after getting DQ'd twice for violence in the past. Leroy ends up speaking to CT to tell him to calm his ass down, and CT loves Leroy, so he's going to listen. I didn't really notice that they were good friends, but I guess it's been mentioned here and there throughout the seasons, though it's never really been focused on. A bunch of the challengers walk in to see a naked ass Tyree asleep on the toilet, and I could have gone a lifetime and an afterlifetime of never seeing this image. We see CT and DM flirting with one another in the pool, and Anissa is not here for it, since it will distract DM, who claims that she and CT aren't friends since they don't speak like that and they didn't speak after exes. CT tells DM to take off her wig, and it is a repeat of the moment that they had on the duel. And she announces that her ovarian cancer came back after exes, and her doctor told her that she won't live to see another year, but she's trying to not let it get to her. The first daily is called Game of Interest, where one pair is hanging from a platform and the other person in the pair has to jump into the other's arms. And I found this to be a pretty cool daily. Emily and Paula win out of the women, and Trey and Zach win out of the men. And Dunbar and Tyree are going in the jungle for being dead last. CT is trying to get Johnny sent in, and he is saying this to Leroy, out of all people, which is a huge mistake. But Tyree does not want to go in against Johnny. Wes realizes that it is too early to make a move. I guess he learned from exes, and CT is doing too much. This somehow gets back to Bananas, and he tells people that it is a dumb move for CT to try to start an unnecessary move and an unnecessary conflict. People from the other gender get to vote the ones from the opposite gender to go in, where the women want to send in Rob and Derek due to them having the least connections, but they are told by Knight that the men want to send in Johnny and Frank. Derek and Rob are sent into elimination since they didn't realize until after the women voted that it's just up to the women to send in the people. Bananas is still complaining about what happened, and CT tells him to get the fuck over it, causing the two of them to argue, and CT doesn't give a shit about throwing him under the bus, with Frank being obnoxious with being Bananas' right-hand man, which is so lovely. West turns the living room into a VIP room, and we do see CT and Anastasia flirting with one another, and we end up seeing them making out. It is clear that CT is using her to flirt and for a vote, as he still has feelings for DM, who isn't worried about who CT hooks up with, which is a nice improvement over the duel 2, where she was worried. Naomi gets a phone call about how her father is having a heart attack, or he's having heart failure, and she made up with him recently despite not having the best relationship with him throughout her life. So she doesn't want to regret staying, and he dies, so she does leave and gives Cook some good advice about being a rookie, and it seems like they made up. I think she did the right thing with leaving, since she would have regretted it had she stayed, and he passed without any closure if that was the case. Just from what I saw of her last season, she wasn't made for the show, and she was doing very poorly on the dailies there, and I doubt things would have changed around here. But she wasn't made for the show, and things happened the way that they should have happened, and it was for the best that she left, so it is what it is. Frank decides to be a big boss with CT and West, where he tells CT that the latter tried to target him, so he, i.e., Frank, now has to retaliate, and CT needs to be wary. Cook is allowed to stay since a new partner is going to arrive at the next challenge. Remember this for a bit later. Anyways, Dunbar and Tyree and Rob and Derek compete in the last chance elimination, where they have to get from one side to the other with One person from a pair playing offense and the latter playing defense. Derek and Rob do beat Dunbar and Tyree by a tenth of a second as Dunbar missed the ring, and Tyree is ranting about getting lost. And we have Dunbar trashing Tyree right to his face, and how he is so glad to not be paired with him anymore. Some claim that Dunbar threw it to be away from Tyree. CT and DM are dancing at the club, and Bananas and Teresa report it to Anastasia, and she claims that she doesn't care, since she is single, but we will see how long that lasts. I don't know why the hell Tyree was given so much chances on the show. He has never won an elimination, never makes it far on any season, and never really brings it as a character. So I am glad that he's done on the flagship. He returned on All Stars recently and continued the trend of flopping. But we'll talk more about that when we get there. And it seemed like they just wanted a certain type of black man on the show that I'm kind of just uncomfortable with, almost like a minstrel show. Anyways, Dogby has been pretty boring over the last few seasons that he took part in. He was kind of checked out and apparently went out of his way to isolate himself. And he's done that over the last few seasons. So I see why this is his last season overall, especially after being with Tyree. It seems like a mutual parting from both him and MTV. And after the whole corn incident, he was looking to get the additional seasons that he got after his winning season. Everyone is sleeping next to the air conditioner, and we have a ninja segment by a few of them starting a balloon fight, which I guess is fun enough, which we have Teresa narrating it. Anastasia and CT are vibing, but she is clearly seeing things differently than he is. And then we see him speak to DM about how she took off her wig to him recently, and he is clearly flirting with her, as he does not like that she is not speaking to him. Anissa ushers her away from the conversation, and then we see Jordan working out and doing lifts, where he doesn't give a crap about only having one hand. Sarah is eyeing him, and there's an immediate attraction between the two of them. CT is complaining about DM to a few of the others, and Trishelle mentions that Anastasia said that they had sex, where he is claiming that she is lying. Frank, for some reason, decides to get involved, and they get into an argument since he does not respect CT. And CT just sees it as the newbie trying to make a name for himself by going at the big dog. Frank pushes CT, and they are having a push fest, essentially, where they are separated, and Jasmine mentions that Frank is going to get his ass kicked. Bananas realizes that his partner is too messy and emotional. How ironic coming from him. And Trishelle is defending Anastasia, claiming that CT is a jerk for using her. Cara Maria is announced as Cook's new partner, and no one is thrilled to see her back, which just shows how disliked she is. And this is like the third season where she is a last minute add on, and I think it's the third season in a row. XXX Games is the daily where they have to use their legs to saw wood, and based on where you finish, you will have a lead. Then one partner has to carry the next upside down, and then put a ball in a trap door. And this is an okay enough daily, I guess. Wes refuses to do the challenge since he does not want to be carried upside down by CT and have his head near his crotch. And Preston refuses it for the exact same reason, where he doesn't want to be near Knight's crotch, where CT and Knight end up partnering here. And honestly, I get why they don't want to do it, but they also kind of just look lame as well. It is very simplistic, which is a good thing, and it is effective as well. We have Zach and Trey and Paula and Emily winning the dailies again, where Anastasia and Jessica are going into elimination for getting last. CT, DM, and Wes are talking about who to target, and CT mentions setting in Trishelle and Sarah, for the former calling him out, where it seems like Wes and DM are into working with Cara Maria and Cook. Though I don't think this lasts very long based on the dynamics for the rest of the season. Sarah is shocked that she is getting votes since she is good with the vets, but Trishelle is hated. But Carmaria and Cook ends up getting voted in, and they use the excuse of her being late. Trishelle is told by Sarah that they got votes because she stood up for Anastasia with CT, and there's this tension between the two of them, where Sarah questions if Trishelle's heart is in it or if she's going to quit. And I also kind of just think that this shows Sarah's male identified ways, where she tends to almost always side with the men over the women when it comes to these types of situations. So Anastasia sees DM and CT together, and it's really starting to get to her, especially when Teresa tells her about CT loving DM and telling her their history, which Anastasia doesn't seem to know about. So I guess she didn't really watch the challenge before this. This all leads to her punching and kicking CT after she tells him to leave, and he refuses, where CT mentions that he isn't a bad guy. Nothing is ever done whenever a woman is balanced with a man on the show, which we also saw with Jasmine and Tyree 2 seasons earlier. Though CT really doesn't take any of this seriously. Jessica does give Anastasia a pep talk about them needing to perform and for her to essentially ignore CT. The elimination is hanging by a thread, where they have to sit up under swings that are above a pond of water, where they have to cut a rope, which will drop the other team. Anastasia is freaking out before the elimination, and people think that she's going to quit, but she does go through with it. But none of it ends up mattering, since Cara Maria and Cook beat Jessica and Anastasia. And we do see Cook pee during the elimination. The elimination is kind of just in my opinion, and it's just middle of the road. Anastasia freaks out after the elimination, and the episode ends with Jordan and Sarah getting closer, where it leads to them making out. Anastasia really didn't seem very well during her time on the show, in my opinion, and I definitely see why she was a one-season wonder, as she was just a bit too fragile for the show, and the CT stuff is just very cringe-worthy. Jessica really didn't do anything memorable during her time on the season, and based on this, I'm very shocked that she gets 3 more seasons and is one of the rookies of the season who does the most. Overall, I really don't have anything else to say about either of them. Marlon and Derek are talking, where the latter is shocked that the former is bisexual, and we see them try to kind of hook up privately, where Derek doesn't know if Marlon is out yet, and he did kind of come out, though he would state later on that everyone already kind of knew, but they do end up fooling around. People are asking Jordan what is Marlon's sexuality, and Jordan explains that Marlon told them on the real world season that he is bisexual and that he had an experience with a guy. They are playing a game where they are imitating one another, and then we get Knight's remedial ass making fun of Marlon by pretending to perform fellatio with a man, and honestly, it's just lame and tacky as hell. But Knight, of course, thinks it's funny because his sort of humor is just low tier. Marlon is ready to beat Knight's ass at this point, and Preston is clearly trying to split them up because he doesn't want to get DQ'd, and Jeremiah hopes that her ex does get beat up at this point. Anissa speaks to Marlon about bisexuality, essentially, and they both bond over it. She's explaining about her coming out story to a lot of the cast, and Jeremiah mentions that Trishelle went off about Anissa over identifying herself, essentially. Anissa approaches Trishelle about what she said, and the latter mentions how Anissa claims that she is black, Jewish, and all these other things. And Anissa doesn't get, what are you trying to refer to, Trishelle? Or Trashelle? Anissa calls Trishelle Trashelle, and you're the same Trashelle that you've always been. Trishelle makes fun of Anissa for being a stripper, and then they have to be separated. Where Anissa kind of like blocks Trishelle's face by lifting her arm up in an L position, and I thought was pretty funny. But it's honestly just sad that Anissa had to go through the same thing that she went through with Robin like 6 years ago. And it seems like people are confused about being bisexual and being biracial. Though just from what is shown here, it seems like Trishelle was focusing more on race than sexuality. But either way, it's an awful look for Trishelle. Because, okay, I have to go back. Trishelle ends up quitting, which pisses Sarah off. And because they can't find a partner for Sarah, despite bringing someone in last episode, she is sent home as well, since she's being pulled due to her partner once again, and Sarah obviously freaks out over this, as she rightfully should. Apparently, the real reason why Trishelle quit was because she injured her foot or got cut, and it was really bothering her, but they did not want to take her to the hospital. So I definitely agree with her leaving here, but she continued the trajectory of having one strong season and having one weak season. But she does make a cameo on All Stars. But honestly, she just looks horrible this season, but at least she apologizes, where I don't even know if Robin sincerely does or not. Sarah didn't really get a whole lot to do, but she was able to hook up with Jordan during her short time on the season, which will be important for one of her upcoming seasons. But I do feel bad for her with being pulled due to her partner yet again. Knight claims that Marlon was victimizing himself, and there is no accountability whatsoever. Mine over Splatter is the daily where the two pairs who didn't do the last challenge will get punished here. So Wes and CT and Knight and Preston, where they have to climb and slide on a rope to get to the other side, and it's a decent daily. The winners are Paula and Emily, with good performances from Janae and Nani and Carmaria and Cook, and Johnny and Frank do beat Zach and Trey and Marlon and Jordan in the daily. Knight and Preston are automatically going into elimination due to Knight's poor performance, and all the women agree to vote in Rob and Derek, since they are the easy vote, and Janae tells Derek what is going to happen. He feels confident for some reason that he isn't getting voting in, despite Janae outright warning him, and of course it ends up happening. I guess he's just being willfully naive in this regard. Zach is giving Knight and Preston his good wishes since he and Knight are good friends. Go figure. And the elimination is Snapper, where one person has to wear bells and they are blindfolded, where they have to break stick a stick on their opponent while being directed by their partner. I don't care much about this elimination, but Knight and Preston do beat Rob and Derek, and we do see Knight apologizing to Marlon, though some seems insincere in my opinion, but Knight and Preston do. Okay, I already read who beat who. We do see Nani and Marlon getting close to one another, and they hook up at the end of the episode. She doesn't care about him being bisexual, and it's interesting that she's saying this since she was most likely suppressing her own bisexuality. I felt comfortable enough with Casey coming into the picture to actually say that, but we'll get there when we get there. Rob and Derek didn't have much to do this season, despite Derek staying with Marlon and the both of them winning in elimination. They are a prime example of newer challengers from the last season getting overshadowed when they have to mix in with the veterans again. Rob never comes back again, and it will take a while for Derek to come back. First to All Stars and eventually the flagship, but for all intensive purposes, this was it for them. And Derek was lucky that All Stars was created, and Rob just hasn't been asked yet, though I've heard he wanted to come back at some point. Jordan and Jonay are feeling one another. He moved on very fast from Sarah, and we see Nanny and CT dancing around with one another, and she is talking about how she is enjoying him. So this really doesn't lead much to anywhere, just from my recollection. DM wrote a rap about Nanny calling her a slut. Sorry, DM's rap is calling Nanny a slut, and Jamie told Nanny about it. DM does deny it when Nanny confronts her about it, and Jamie calls DM out about it, where she is refusing to let her deny it. And this will come up again on the reunion. Wes and a few of the others decide to play a prank, so they do write a rap about Nanny, but when she sees it, she doesn't give them a reaction, and honestly, good for her, since she's very reactionary, and this is one of the instances where she didn't give them that. Jamie and Leroy are supposedly feeling one another, and Wes is trying to kind of play matchmaker between the two of them, where she doesn't give a fuck if Knight is there and she doesn't care about his feelings. Stumped is the daily where they have to go from one maze to another, where they are also tied to a large bamboo stick, and I really do like this daily, and it is a strong case of teamwork for someone that is something that is seemingly so simplistic. Jordan and Marlon do beat Leroy and Ty at first, and Teresa and Jasmine are going right into elimination for getting last, where Emily and Paula yet again beat someone, but second place is Anissa and DM. The guys are already planning on throwing in Cook and Cara Maria since they are easy vote scapegoats, but they don't want them to go home since they want to continue voting them in, and they can't continue voting them in if they are eliminated. Some of the guys do tell Cook about the plan, and she does not like this at all, where she does campaign to make sure it doesn't happen, where she's speaking to people like Ty and Zach to throw in DM and Anissa. DM hears about this and is really pissed off, since how dare they try to get the guys that she's known for years to throw her in. And this is one of the many instances of DM and Cook just not liking one another in the season. Cook and Carmaria are voted in, and we have Leroy and Ty kind of joking slash singing about how they hate one another. and the house is entertained by their antics, where Knight confronts Leroy about whether he intends to hook up with Jamie, and Leroy says yes, essentially. Knight decides to throw ketchup on Jamie, and since he knows that she has a fear of ketchup, she really takes this personally. So they continue arguing, and she mentioned that he's mad because she can sit on Leroy, and all this kind of just turns off Leroy from Jamie. Due to this, he decides to move on to Teresa, and Jamie really doesn't care, which I guess is mature enough for her. We do see Jasmine and Teresa and Carmaria and Cook being prepared to go into the who can take that elimination, which involves a lot of shocks. But the elimination was a farce, and it doesn't happen. Essentially, it's a non-elimination round to make up for Sarah and Trishelle leaving. DM finally decides to take off her wig on her own without CT advising her to do so, giving her some sort of courage. Okay, so I have to add more commentary regarding this whole catch-up fight. Jimmy really doesn't have a right to be mad since she was blatantly throwing stuff at Knight first, and she was throwing food at him. So I don't know why she's shocked when he threw something back at her. But I guess it's just a double standard, and this will probably be the only time where I ever defend Knight. Teresa and Leroy are hooking up with a bunch of people spying on them, and Nanny is glad that her homeboy is getting some. Wes is salty because they did it on Wes's bed, and he calls Leroy a trash man, not just because of his job, but because he's with Wes's sloppy leftovers and sloppy seconds. CT and DM are teasing Teresa about her hookup with Leroy, and it's all in good fun. Wes moves his bed to another room to be away from Leroy, and the latter sees it as childish as hell, and the house makes a Wes doll in his old bed. Wes thinks that Leroy is insecure about Teresa being with him first, though I'm pretty sure Leroy doesn't give a fuck at all. And we do move on to Zach calling his mom about his sister, I believe, giving birth to a baby, and he's crying his eyes out since it is his first nephew. Zach and Frank are having a discussion about him being a new uncle, and you rarely see them talk this season, so this is nice. They and Paula knows that he is having a panic attack, and he is pretty sick. A tummy ache, actually, but he does not want the cameras in his face. This leads to him snapping on the cameraman recording him, since if they want a shot, they will get a shot, where he breaks stuff in the room and curses the cameras to get the fuck out. Frank is kind of jealous of Zach and Knight's friendship, or that's what it seems like to me, but the medic finally shows up. Wes is campaigning to DM for Leroy to be targeted, and she is fine with it, since she's protecting 4 more teams before them. Frog Smash is the daily where they have to run a beam or across a beam where huge cylinders of some sort are being swung, which some of the others in the woman are on and can control. We see the woman let Jasmine and Teresa win the daily because they wanted to sabotage Cook and Carmaria, and the other side uses Jasmine and Teresa as well, so they essentially are double dipping. There is a plan for a lot of the men to get Preston and Knight out of the challenge, but Bananas wants Zack and Trey to go into elimination, so he allows Knight and Preston to coast. And Zack is pissed off at Bananas for letting Knight and Preston run by. Zack and Trey complain about it to the woman, and Zack is over trying to be nice to Johnny for Frank's sake. Jasmine and Teresa win the daily, as well as CT and West, with Zack and Trey going into elimination. Zack complains to Frank about Johnny and makes it clear that he's campaigning against Johnny, so Frank should not take it seriously. But obviously, Frank is going to take it seriously since Frank has to go in with Johnny. The two of them start to argue since Frank thinks that Zack is throwing their friendship under the bus for something Zack lost on his own. Teresa and Jasmine are talking about how they want to send in Knight and Preston since the rookies are good and they have ties to the other men. We see a conversation with Zack and Teresa about him threatening to go after people who does not go after Johnny, which leads to Teresa wasting her vote to send in Leroy and Ty, her showmans. And Nanny even throws her supposed best friend under the bus to Leroy by voting for him in a bone vote. Since she mentioned something about having 2 teams protecting them, the vote essentially flips here because Nanny and Teresa, the 2 women that Leroy are close to, burned their votes. DM went with it and took this towards her advantage, or used this towards her advantage, and voted with them anyways. Leroy is rightfully pissed off, and Teresa feels like shit, as she should, since this wasn't supposed to happen. Wes is thrilled since he got what he wanted and Leroy's been picking on him obsessively. And honestly, this man is just effing delusional. Though he might just be playing it up for the cameras. Teresa confronts DM about the move she made, and DM mentions that it is not her fault when she went with Teresa's mistake. Leroy and Teresa complain about DM, and she now wants to fuck DM up in elimination, though Leroy seemingly forgives Teresa. The elimination is breaking on through, where they have to break through 3 doors and use their tools to break down the floors, and they have to break through the floor. But one person has to alternate through each floor. It seems like Zack and Trey won the elimination, with Zack throwing his helmet at the crowd, which is such an asshole thing to do. The issue is they cheated because Zack did the first floor, and then he ended up doing the second floor, where they were supposed to alternate floors. So they do end up DQing here. Zack showed his complete ass on this season, and especially on his final episode. For flipping out on production, from what I heard, though it was mainly about them not giving him a medic and him throwing his helmet at the cast, but the downfall was entertaining, so I do see why he came back after this. It is kind of a shame since he and Trey were performing well in the season up until this point. Speaking of Trey, he really didn't do anything notable on the season on a character point of view, but I will say that it didn't seem like he was refusing to get into politics like last season. He joined a few of the men here who didn't transfer well on a season with veterans, and he was kind of boring last season anyway, so he's kind of lucky to be on this season. Anissa and Teresa are talking about how DM screwed over the ladder, and Teresa is out for blood regarding DM. She then complains about it to Jasmine, where they are planning the order for the next challenge and how they need to use it to their advantage. Janae and Jordan are talking about their next game plan, and he mentions that he is going to stick to the loyalties that he promised earlier. And Janae mentions that neither one of them are looking for a relationship, but they do trust one another in this environment. Frenemies is the daily where one person of a pair will be high above water, and they have to answer the question the exact same that their partner is to see how well they know one another. And due to the order and Teresa having to do this on her own, she kind of sided with the newbies when it comes to the order. Jeremy and Camilla are going into the jungle elimination, and DM is shocked that Cook called her fake, and Jeremy is shocked that Teresa and Janae think that she is fake. Paula and Emily win the daily yet again, which is just so boring at this point, and Jamie calls out Janae, though she knows Janae will never stand up for herself, and Janae essentially pays her absolute dust. CT throws the woman answer to call out the trashiest woman, since he doesn't want to piss off the woman who determines his fate. We have Leroy and Ty winning the daily for the men as well. The two men wants to get the revenge on the woman, and Teresa already knows her ass is on the line, so she is campaigning to Jordan Preston, and I think the other guy is Wes, but we don't know. Or I don't know for sure. Jordan speaks to Marlon about the plan, and then Johnny butts in to give them unwarranted advice, causing for a bit of a tiff between himself and Jordan. Teresa and Jasmine are voted in by the men overall, with Jordan stabbing Teresa in the back. Since he wants to protect DM, they've apparently been aligned from the beginning over a 5-minute agreement with Teresa. We have Teresa ranting and raving to her partner, and Jasmine is also pissed off since they looked at them in their eyes. And now the two of them want to go after Jordan and Marlon. Though, of course, Teresa in general is just not really taking accountability for her poor political moves. Jasmine speaks to her girl Janae about why she is going after Jordan as a partner, since he is just like Zack personality-wise, and Janae doesn't like the comparison. Jasmine is essentially saying that Janae is a dumbass, or Janae being a dumbass is why Zack left her ass in the confessional, and yikes. And Jasmine thinks that Jordan is running her, essentially. We then move on to seeing Teresa and Jordan going at it since he broke his word to her, and Jordan didn't want to piss off 2 more people. Jordan claims that he never goes back on his word, and Teresa says that he should have never said it to her face, and they're both yelling at the top of their lungs to one another, where he states that she isn't coming back at all, and now he wants her to actively go. Teresa knows that the house is avoiding her the next morning, making it clear that they want her gone, but we do move on to the elimination. Catch 22 is the elimination where they are both on treadmills and they have to throw balls to their partner, who will put it in a barrel, but they will fall into the water barrel if they are not maintaining their speed. Jasmine, of course, screws it up for them, and Jimmy and Camilla win the elimination. And I really did enjoy this elimination, which I wished we saw more in the series. The episode ends with Janae and Jordan flirting with one another while working out, and Nanny rants about how Janae is so male focused, and her acting like this with Zach is why they ended up falling out last season, and she sees the same thing happening with Jordan. This is just one of the many signs of Teresa's messy politics, which does not get better in future seasons, but I did find her arc throughout the last two episodes or so to be very entertaining, especially with her flame out with Leroy, her fallout with Jordan, and her feud with DM as well. Jasmine is really not that interesting anymore, though she may give a good soundbite or confessional every 3 episodes. She's mainly in the background, so I definitely do see why she started to wind down, and our time on the flagship is coming to a quick close, especially with her not being competitive either and not really getting into hookups. Teresa has 2 more seasons before she takes, I guess, her first retirement, so yeah, there's not much for either of them at this point. DM and Anissa are struggling to get along since DM wants Anissa to run with her, and Anissa refuses. And this is just Anissa being Anissa, and it's funny rewatching all of this. And the same complaints that she's gotten during the recent seasons are the ones that she's gotten in a lot of these older seasons as well. So it's kind of just amusing to me at this point. Anissa is tired of DM being on her back, and DM thinks that Anissa comes up with excuses over everything. And we see Anissa complain to Frank about DM wanting to run, and how she is tired of being talked down to. And Frank is actually giving advice and being a good mediator for once without involving himself in the situation or comparing it to himself. Anissa and DM start to argue about it, where they are worse than they were entering the season. And I do think this was clearly just thrown in here for a setup for what happens later on in the episode. Blind Leading the Blind is the daily where they have to be blindfolded to go through a maze of some sorts while being electroshocked, which signals that they're going the right way. And I think it's a decent daily, though I just really just do not like seeing people get electroshocked at all. Leroy and Ty get last in the daily, barely over Marlon and Jordan, so they're going to elimination, and Anissa and DM, as well as Frank and Johnny, win the daily. Hence the scene earlier on in the episode, and we learn that Frank and Johnny beat West NCT by like a second. Paula speaks to the other women about voting in Knight and Preston again, and Johnny wants to protect the duo because they are layups. Johnny mentions that the rookies have not gone into elimination yet, and Frank tells them that Jordan stated in front of everyone that he broke his promise, so keeping someone untrustworthy is just dumb. Emily and the other women defend their choice, and Jordan hears Frank trashing him. We see another conversation where Jordan calls out Frank for campaigning against him, and Frank walks off, only to rant to the other woman about he's being calm and he's been on his best behavior this season. And Jordan is now on his shit list. Emily calls out Jordan for trying to rile up Frank, and then Frank decides to call out Jordan, who is a little bitch and is an unproven loser, and he has nothing to say, and he hasn't proven himself. Jordan mentions that he isn't scared, and Frank yells that he should volunteer himself to back that talk up, essentially. Marlon and Jordan are the votes to face Leroy and Ty, so Johnny essentially got what he wanted here. Camilla tells Jordan that he has to prove himself as a rookie, and Jordan is annoyed that Frank and Johnny were the ones who changed it, instead of it being a natural thing. Frank comes again and mentions his name coming out of Jordan's mouth, and the two of them are getting in one another's face, and things are starting to somewhat get a bit physical between them, though we know nothing's really going to happen, only for Johnny and the others to pull Frank away. Johnny mentions that he wanted to protect the layup, and it's time for the rookies to prove themselves. Marlon decides to wrestle Leroy to rile him up, and it's a pretty fun segment. The elimination is Last Chance, and it's a really close slash good elimination to watch, with Ty kind of blowing it at the end. Leroy was the recipient of a one-sided feud with West throughout the season, and he had his hookup with Teresa, which of course ended horribly, but it was a more notable season for him compared to his disappointing second season. Though we obviously had Teresa and Nanny burning fault on him, which sadly wouldn't be the first time that this happened to him. I literally do not remember Ty getting screen time whatsoever during the season. So with that, and wanting to be better behaved, kind of like his last season, I see why this is his last season. In general, their rivalry seemed contrived as hell, and there's really nothing to it. CT and DM are flirting with one another, and he tells her that he still loves her while they are dancing with one another. We see Jonay and Frank talking about their friendship, where she moved in with him after Zach dumped and ditched her, and she hopes that their friendship can remain trustful. He rants about these new kids like Marlon, Jordan, Jamai, and Knight, and hold up. He debuted last season, just like Jemmy and Knight, and this is only his second season, so he himself is still a new kid his damn self. Anyways, Jamie hears and sees Frank shit talking her, and she rants to her ex about it, where she is pissed off that Knight did not defend her. Remember this for later. And it causes them to go back and forth, where Camilla shuts it down, since she does not want her teammates to be pressed by him. Johnny decides to pipe in, and it just makes everything even worse, since he is getting a rise out of Camilla, and it sets her off, where she is ranting to a bunch of the other women. Camilla is in her bedroom and then tries to go after him, where a bunch of the women have to hold her back. The bed is knocked over, and she ends up punching the glass door/window. The guys literally hide away from her, and Johnny calls her crazy like she wasn't exes, but it's essentially another Camillinator moment. Swingers is the daily where they have to jump on another bar and then swim to a buoy and back. Cara Maria has a pathetically bad performance on the challenge. Wes and CT win the daily for the guys, and Jimmy and Camilla barely beats DM and Anissa, with Cara Maria and Cook going into the elimination for being last. Cook complains about Cara Maria to Jemmy and is shocked that she doesn't know how to swim, despite doing this for how many seasons now? And it's awkward because Cara Maria walks in and joins the conversation. Frank tells Jonay that the vote was going to be Camaria and Cook, but they got last. And then they were going to vote Jemmy and Camilla as the alternate, but then they won the daily. So he essentially gives her a heads up that she's going to be voted in. DM and Paula speak to Frank about how she kind of just needs to suck it up, and though she gets that he helped Janae out in real life, but it's not like DM and Anissa or Paula and Emily are getting voted in anyway, so it is what it is. The predictable vote of Nanny and Janae takes place, and of course, Frank turns on her. Janae complains to Nanny about the situation, and Frank tries to speak to her, where she really doesn't have much to say, despite complaining to Emily that Janae and Nanny got themselves in the situation. And this is kind of the thing that Frank tends to do. He feels sorry for doing some of these situations. We saw him kind of do this with Marie last season, but then he tries to justify it himself by kind of directing blame from him and to put it on anyone else. And it's just very frustrating to watch. We see CT and Knight massaging and so much groping Jimmy to make DM jealous, and she sees right through it. Frank ends up wearing a Drenay headband in support at the elimination, but people still think that Frank is shady as hell. And we see Marlon and Jordan make a few confessionals about it. Snapper is the elimination, and of course, Cara Maria and Cook beat Janae and Nanny, which Paula and Frank are not thrilled with, though Janae ends up saying F off to Frank on her way out. Frank complains about his disgusting reputation, and people still hating him, and DM is trying to give him support. Nanny actually had a pretty quiet season this time around. Though it's clear that she and Janae made up, she was genuinely worried for her, though we did have that hookup with Marley that was briefly shown on the show. Janae got into another showmance, but it was with Jordan this season, which definitely came off as more sincere, and it's nice to see them not really take it seriously. She didn't really get into the drama, though of course we had that weird fallout with Frank. Though I know they're fine today as I'm recording this because they did a live together a few weeks ago and joking around and all that jazz. They were one of the more middle of the road two pairings of the season. It is the final guy's elimination, and we see CT and DM talking about how he actually enjoys Wes as a teammate, and they joke about his supposed sexual chemistry with Wes. Jordan is speaking about the partnerships, and Paula mentions that she and Emily work well together, where Preston talks about how he is the rational one in his partnership, and Knight still sucks, with Bananas loudly repeating this right when Knight enters the kitchen in his pot stirring ways. Anyways, CT and DM are in the club and they start kissing one another, and Anissa is just confused about the entire situation. We are expecting that CT and DM are going to sleep with one another after the club since she wants to lay on his bed, but she ends up passing out on his bed, and that kind of disappoints him. Jordan and Marlon know that they're on the chopping block if they don't win, since they are still rookies. Rampage is the daily where a pair has to grab a ball and run through the X to put their balls in the baskets within 3 minutes. It's essentially the elimination that we saw in the first 3 seasons of the era, but it's a cool enough challenge that's used as a daily here. People are making fun of Johnny for being out of shape and old, but we have Paula and Emily barely beating Cara Maria and Cook, and Wes and CT dominates the daily. Knight and Preston are going right into elimination for getting last, and Jemmy and Carmaria tell Marlon that they're planning on voting for Johnny and Frank, even though he really doesn't believe it. CT and Johnny are speaking about how the latter has not performed as well as he did, and is under the assumption that he is safe, and Frank complains about Johnny's performance to Paula, where Wes and CT just wants to beat him. We get to the ceremony and we have Jordan and Mullen going into elimination, but I end up with a fight with Johnny and CT and Wes, where all of them are safe. Wes mentions that he's glad to be in the final with the shitty Johnny, where the latter mentions that on his last final, he had to be carried by Wes. Wes had to be carried by Kenny on Rivals. After the ceremony, the two of them are going at it with one another, and CT decides that he's going to defend his partner. So they're essentially tag teaming the hell out of Johnny at this point. And the three guys start to push each other, and the two nominees are hoping that a punch is thrown so they can get DQ'd and the nominees can remain safe. Wes mentions that Johnny has nothing else but the show. Johnny pushes the both of them. They push him back, kind of. Wes mentions that he has a Porsche, a house, and 30 companies, so suck my dick! It's just hilarious. Johnny mentions that they both died recently in finals, and he mentions CT dying in the X's final. And CT doesn't get why the past is being brought up, where they are performing better than Johnny on this season. Paula, Johnny, Frank, and Camilla are talking about the fight, and Paula is confused about DM mentioning, why? Where they are under the assumption that CT is manipulating her. We do see CT and DM talking about the conversation and how they want to make it to the finals, but he mentions that he doesn't care about what is happening in the game at this point, which should have been a sign for her. But we'll get there when we get there. Breaking on through is the elimination where Jordan and Marlon easily beat Knight and Preston, mainly with Knight screwing up, and it's kind of a repeated thing during the season. CT and DM are having a conversation where they are flirting with one another, and Bananas is losing respect for DM due to going down the same path that will cause her to be heartbroken once again. Preston was actually on the edit this season, which I do appreciate, and I would be lying if I said I had much of an opinion on him. He seemed cool enough, but not really a notable personality. But maybe I will have more of an opinion on him during his next and final season. Knight still had his awful moments, especially with the biphobia towards Marlon and just his general treatment of Preston, but I see how some people could find him funny for some reason, and I appreciated that his interactions with Jeremy were a lot less emphasized this season. CT is feeling great since all he has to do is chill and train for the final, and DM is talking to Anissa about feeling full with CT, hoping that is all real, especially since he's trying to help her out. Johnny speaks to DM about how nothing good is going to happen after the show, and nothing's going to happen at all after the show, as he mentions that CT is not a good person. Clearly, there's some behind the scenes stuff that happened with CT and DM over the years that not only Johnny is aware of, but he is referring towards in general, since apparently they were really, really, really good friends. Johnny and DM, that's who I'm referring to. Camilla is giving DM her reassurance about everything, and Cook and Carmuya talk about how they are one of the top competitors in the house, though they know that they will go into the jungle if they don't win the daily, essentially. All the women decide that they need to make it to the end and to boot Cook and Cara Maria, though Paula and Emily are worried that the woman will turn on them. Paula walks off after DM mentions if she's okay, and Paula knows that they won't be friends after this, where a thunderstorm is coming, but she doesn't know what it is. Color correction is the daily where they have to run to memorize the colors of a set of flashing lights in a sequential order, and then they have to put pieces in order of the flashing colors, where they are also chained together. Anissa and DM are going to the jungle elimination for getting last, and Cook and Carmilla win the daily, which is the worst case scenario for all the other women. Essentially, the majority aligned now have to turn on one another with the women, where DM asks Johnny if they can send in Camilla and Jemmy. And Camilla sees this. And honestly, they haven't even left the challenge yet, so DM got right to work. And it is definitely causing some tension between them. DM is ranting about Cook and Cara Maria, especially since Cook was smirking when she got last place, while Emily and Paula are just looking with blank faces. Everyone is talking about how paranoid DM is, and DM and Anissa campaigning to Johnny and Frank, where DM is mad that CT and West hasn't asked her who she wants to go against. So they are thinking that CT is using her, with Frank mentioning that CT hasn't kissed her since before the last guy's vote, clearly pushing her in that mind process, or that thought process. DM decides to speak to CT about the issue, since he and West did not approach her about who she wants, and they mentioned that only two teams are on the chopping block, and CT doesn't really see the big deal, since she's already going into elimination, so she just needs to focus on winning. The two of them mention that they can't do anything for her, and CT doesn't want to send in Camilla and Jimmy, mentioning that he isn't going to just do whatever she wants anymore due to the hold that she has on him and the hold she had on him in the past. Paula and Emily are campaigning to Jordan and Marlon, and Marlon wants to send them in, due to the two women voting for them, or voting them in. And the two women mention that Jamie and Camilla don't deserve to be in the final over them, and it's just all this entitlement from all of these women is just ridiculous. Jamie is pissed off when she enters the conversation, and she relays all this to Camilla. Jamie and Camilla are voted into the elimination, and Camilla is shocked that Johnny voted for her. Camilla is arguing with DM about campaigning behind her back, and Camilla mentions that DM is acting. DM mentions that she didn't do anything wrong, and the house is just watching them go at it. Jamie tags into the conversation, and she calls DM a fake ass bitch, good card, fake ass, and mentions that she is down for chasing CT when he has fucked every woman in the house. Huck, for some reason, decides to jump in here, though it really has nothing to do with her since she's safe. Jamie and DM continue going back and forth, where Anissa has to tell DM not to engage, and she is diffusing the situation. We thought this was the end of it, but this is far from the end of it. DM gets a glass of wine, and she has this maniacal look on her face, and she continues to pick at Cook for them not liking one another throughout the season. Emily calms down DM, who is sad about CT using her, and she's humiliated about hearing it from a nobody like Jamie. DM continues to spread her reign of terror and mentions to Bananas that CT is next. And she does go after him, with the cast assuring the cameraman to follow her. And I found that part to be very funny. CT doesn't think that he did anything wrong, and she mentions that she got her way not because of him, and he does not appreciate her using their emotions to manipulate the game. DM and Anissa are in a good place, and DM is grateful for having Anissa as a partner this season. The elimination is hanging by a thread, and Jamie and Camilla do beat Anissa and DM. Anissa had her argument with Trishelle in the beginning of the season, which was tiring that she still had to fight about her racial identity, but in general she was more under the radar this season and was pretty much a mediator otherwise, especially regarding DM. Speaking of DM, she had a much more interesting season here, where she came off as a bit more villainous or a lot more complex in a CPM type of way. Maybe that isn't the right word, but there's definitely more negative elements to her in comparison to her other seasons. And I do think that it made her more interesting this season, though we still had her drama with CT once again. It's sad that her final season is her slowly passing away, and I'm honestly not looking forward to watching it. Cast are thinking about TJ's last words about it being very hot, and they think that they're going to be moved to somewhere cold, since the last three finals have been elsewhere. And ironically, that's when Era 3 started. CT and Cook are training Cara Maria on how to swim. And it's crazy because I remember Polly complaining about her swimming on War of the Worlds 2, which was like 6 or 7 years after the season. And we learned that the final is taking place in the city, so not the coast. As they are riding on the bus, TJ and a few people are wearing covered hats and black outfits to quote unquote kidnap them. Dream Island is the first part of the final, where they have to swim to the island, complete a puzzle, and they will have to do some other stuff where there are two boats for the top two men and women pairs, meaning that third place will be left on the island. CT and West gain a lead, and it doesn't really let up, and Cara Maria and Cook are the first teams of women to get onto the yacht. Paul and Emily sail onto the yacht, and Frank and Johnny time out, but they rush to the boat since they arrived first. Jordan and Marlon get on a kayak and they're on a race, with Frank and Johnny barely making it onto the sailboat. Jemmy and Camilla and Marlon and Jordan are eliminated. Jordan definitely showed a lot of promise as a rookie this season. He was good at the challenges, was able to hang in somewhat politically, was great in confessionals, and got into his fair share of fights in the season with the likes of Frank and Teresa, while getting into some hookups with Jonay and Sarah. It's not a shocker that he became one of the stars of the show and one of the best challengers of the show. Marlon also got into many hookups with men and women, got into a few fights as well, being a big personality and performing well in some of the challenges in general. It's really a shame that he never returned. I know he rejected the next few seasons because he wanted to focus on his music career, but when he wanted to come back, the calls stopped coming. They gave Avery another chance or two after being in a similar predicament recently, so I'm hoping that they give him another chance. Though I thought he would have been back by now after being on X on the Beach, but that hasn't happened. I don't think Jemmy was as funny this season as she was in the last season, but we did see some of her messiness, especially with her ex and even in the DM situation. Overall, I did find it to be pretty under the radar at Weiss this season, though this was probably her best season competitively, though things would take a downhill turn for her fast in that regard. Camilla was also pretty under the radar this season, despite her making it to the final this season, which was just odd. I guess she and Jemmy didn't really have much of a dynamic, and that played into the edit, and while she did have some dramatic moments, it's pretty tame compared to what we've seen from her beforehand and what we will see of her afterwards. And the others kind of just overshadowed her. I guess it's one of her more tolerable seasons, but that doesn't say much at all. It is the next day, and they move to Nightmare Island, where they have to get a sacred golden elephant, or I think five of them, and that will happen by going through a bunch of checkpoints. They swim to Nightmare Island. The first checkpoint involves rearranging some sort of sticks. Then CT and West are in the lead at this point, with Carmaria and Cook being in the lead here. The next checkpoint is to cut through a fence and then solve some sort of math equation where they have to cut a rope. The next checkpoint is to eat a bunch of disgusting food, and of course, this is the stuff that I love to watch. I hope people are picking up on my sarcasm if I didn't make it very clear. Paula and Emily take the lead at the eating portion, and they never let go of that lead. And the next checkpoint involves carrying some bags, and then the last checkpoint is digging to find a tunnel to get to the final idol. CT and West win the season for the guys, and Emily and Paula win the season for the women. Johnny and Frank was a contrived as hell pairing, and it was clear that they were last minute partners, with Dustin dropping out and them not wanting to drop Frank. So they paired him with Johnny, who was supposedly originally with Dunbar. And we don't even see them arguing this season, which just showed how contrived it really was. Anyways, they worked pretty well as a team together, and there wasn't any drama with them, though they picked several fights with other people. Frank wasn't as awful as he was last season, but he still lacked self awareness, got involved in things that had nothing to do with him, and was whiny, but his trajectory was coming to an end very soon. Bananas was a supportive friend to DM, but mainly had his conflicts with CT and West this season, which I do think the conflicts peaked here and was real here, where in the future I don't think that's the case. This is the final season where Conmaria was a last minute add-on, and she didn't do a whole lot this season, outside of performing poorly in the dailies and struggling with her social game. Though this was the start of her getting closer to CT, though that wasn't really focused on. Literally, this is the third time in a row that I'm using her ex's picture here because she was added late in her last two seasons. She and Cook had a friendly dynamic through the season, despite the frustrations about the mainly Carmira's performances. Honestly, Cook was pretty unlikable this season, and it's even worse reading about all the unaired stuff that happened with she and DM. But she was a good athlete and had some dramatic moments, but she wanted to prioritize her athletic career, and she was an alternate for All Stars 1, I believe, but it was too much for her husband for her to be gone for a week just for that. So I doubt we ever see her again. So, eh. West and CT definitely had their arguments with other people throughout the season, and they had their arguments with one another throughout the show, like on the duel and on Rivals. But their arguments with one another really wasn't a thing this season, but they were a good pair this season. Apparently, Wes wasn't really checked into the season, but once he saw the competition, he called his work and told them that he was going to take the entire season off, knowing that he could win this one. Both of them had their shits together personally and competitively, where they didn't have a whole lot of competition, especially after the first third of the season. West definitely took a lot more of a backseat in the narrative compared to CT, who had a lot of drama and romances in the season, but they got along well and they were definitely dominant throughout the season. But West definitely got in the groove again after his last two seasons where he hugely flopped. Emily really didn't do much in the season, or at least regarding what made it on the edit, outside of just dominating the challenges. I don't know if she was just so focused on the work or she was really that boring, but there's not much to talk about. I see why this was her last season, outside of the circumstantial 40, as there just isn't much there. Paula is also someone who's pretty under-edited in the season, at least when it comes to the storylines or whatever, though she still got a decent amount of diary rooms. Or confessionals, my bad, wrong show. And I don't know if it's because of her and Emily getting along, or Paula really getting her shits together, but I do think that she ended her challenge career on a high note. I do respect her for getting sober at around this time and keeping it a decade later as I'm recording this, where returning to the show would actively break her sobriety and ruin all of the progress she made in her personal life, so it's very respectable. We finally have a reunion that I can watch, and it is the first and only time that it is a live reunion. Johnny Mosley is hosting the reunion, and Wes has a weird ass hairstyle. Same thing with Johnny, and TT is congratulated for finally winning after 9 seasons. The two talk about how they respected one another, so they're able to get along in the season, though CT is being odd with his answers, which only continues as the reunion goes on. Paula mentions that she won too, as Johnny kept focusing on Emily getting her first win, but Paula mentions that she plays better with people that she fought with or got intimate with, as they were rivals this season due to time. Cara talks about how everyone assumed that she was weak, though she mentions that Cook would have went home first had Naomi stayed in the house, since you're only as strong as your weakest link. Jeremy talks about not liking ketchup due to the fight with Knight, and apparently Jeremy and Camille have a love-hate sister relationship. Knight and Preston are joking around, so it seems like they are fine, and we also see that Marlon and Jordan are fine as well. Frank talks about Johnny not being as bad as he thought, and it was interesting because they never met before, and Johnny excuses their actions due to them both being loudmouthed Italians. Frank's Twitter is talked about since he calls out people for not saying shit to his face, and he was referring to many people on the cast. He was annoyed that people weren't adding or attacking him under their tweets, and he claims that he backs up everything that he says. Knight calls him a bitch, and Frank says that he still beats him at the game. Knight says that Frank needs his jaw broken and isn't a man. Frank says that Knight needs to get his life together, and Knight mentions that Knight honestly doesn't really make sense here. He claims that if he heard what Frank said about Jenny, he would have popped him earlier. And then Frank says, no, Knight makes fun of Frank's job as a server, though Frank says that he's a grad student. And what's wrong with being a server? Anyways, he slaps Frank, though it seemed like he wanted to punch him. And Frank shockingly remains calm in the situation. It seems like Frank is completely unfazed about what happened, or he seems to, but then he walks off stage as soon as the commercial happens and he doesn't come out for a while. So you can tell that he's very upset. And I do think this is one of the reasons why it led to him not doing the show anymore. So when it comes to the situation, I'm kind of mixed on it. We've seen Frank get physical, pushing and shoving people on both of these seasons, but it seemed like he thought nothing would end up happening to him, and he got popped, essentially. So he kind of got the energy that he was giving to other people within these last two seasons. At the same time, it was clear that Frank wasn't giving that energy this time, and it seemed like Knight was being very performative with it. And I think he didn't do it for Jimmy. I think he did it because he was getting clowned because he wasn't defending her on the season. So he felt like this was just a chance to be a big man, blah, 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 blah. And Knight didn't say, Frank, we need to square up, let's do it. Because I think if he was in an equal playing ground with Frank, he would have gotten beat up. And he was kind of just like slurring. So honestly, it was just a lame situation all around. And it shows why they haven't done a live reunion since. DM talks about, or DM is talked about not being liked on the show for the first time in her career of the season, and she talks about menopause and how she was injecting herself with steroids and hormones due to her treatment. Bananas comes in to defend DM, especially with her just going through chemotherapy before doing the season. So she needs to be given grace, and CT jumps in to defend her as well. DM talks about how there are so many newer women on the season, and I think that's why there is so much of a divide, since they didn't get a chance to know her and vice versa. And Jemai, while understanding DM's position, she stands firm in her position with her acting fake in game situations, but she doesn't think DM is a fake person in real life. Anissa talks about her being maternal of DM, where they were good before the season, though they didn't talk for 7 months after the duel. Frank finally comes back to the stage and he claims that his actions are all about strategy, which I heavily doubt. Frank does apologize to Jamie since their issues were about real life and they are fine, and she claims that she's not proud of what Knight did. There are some jabs between Johnny and Carmaria about the latter being a late addition this season and no one clapping when she arrived. Essentially, proving that she isn't like, though Kara's just used to it by this point. CT and DM's relationship is in discussion next, and CT essentially steamrolls Johnny over the conversation, where Johnny calls CT out about how they're going to choreograph the discussion. Here's my thing. Obviously, I do get that DM's going through treatment and all that stuff, but she's been through many reunions before. She knows what happens at reunions. They know what happens at reunions. You're going to be asked about your behavior, not only just on the show, but on social media as well. The good and the bad. So the fact that they barely let her answer, I felt like she shouldn't have to answer for her actions in the game was honestly just ridiculous to me. Anyways, Martin talked about how Knight made several jokes at his expense before the situation that the two of them had, but then he taught Knight to shut the hell up, and apparently he hooked up with Cook as well. I'm assuming Knight left after he punched or slapped Frank, since we don't see him again at the reunion. So I looked back on where I kind of ranked the seasons when I watched it for the first time. And obviously, I watched this season for the first time a year ago. And it isn't even in my top 10. I think it's roughly around like 15 or something. But my opinion on this season rose a lot. But just based off of where I have it right now, it's, I think it's like third. And it could easily move up or move down a bit. But it's definitely a top 5 season for sure. We saw a lot of the newbies kind of intermingling with the veterans, though some of them sunk and others would rise. We had a lot of interesting votes with the genders voting for the opposite ones, and that made the season a bit more interesting politically compared to its predecessor in Rivals, though it was mainly still the veterans dominating over the newer people. There's so much drama in damn near every single episode, and it really wasn't like the toxic type of drama that we saw in, hell, even last season or in a lot of the Era 2 seasons. So it's a refreshing tour of drama. The format was really, really, really good. The unfortunate thing about this season is that you saw a lot of the Era 2 people start to kind of wind down. And this would be some of the start of a lot of the earlier Era 3 people, so people who were introduced in the first 3 seasons of the era. They wouldn't really live up to their legacy, and they'd start winding down here too. So you saw a lot of the early Era 3 people winding down starting this season, and that would kind of just continue. And it kind of just showed that a lot of the Battle of the Seasons people, with the exception of a few of them, didn't really have much longevity. But a lot of the things that happen in the season really wouldn't carry over on future seasons, so it isn't the most relevant season, but it's just a really great season all the way around. So it's very well rounded, and there are a lot of challenge seasons that I can't say that about. I can't believe we are in the middle of Era 3 already, and it's really just going on by. Free Agents was one of my favorite seasons when I watched it the first time, so I'm hoping that my opinion on it will stay when I rewatch it. But I'm most definitely looking forward to the season. Another point that I want to mention is that the real world is essentially on its way out at this point. Obviously, they introduced the Portland cast with this season, and there's really only 3 other real world seasons after this. And it seemed like before it ended, they knew that it was ending soon. So they're starting to become casting issues, and they foresaw a casting drought, and you'd start to notice some of those changes within the next few seasons, where they start to get people from other shows. So that's definitely a trend that I want us to focus on throughout the next few seasons. And that also adds onto the layer of a lot of the Era 2 and the early Era 3 people winding down, just to set that extra context for some of the latter seasons. Anyways, thank you all for watching this, and I'll be back with more content soon. Take care!